Welcome to Island Connections. It's co-sponsored by the Department of Ethnic Studies and Information Technology Services, both at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. I am Brahim Aude, the host for the show for this evening. And we are live on the air for Oahu and the Big Island of Hawaii. And the number to call on Oahu, since we're live, we'd like to have your questions and comments. The number to call is 956-5670. And the number for the Big Island is 1-800-342-7949. And these are shown also on the screen. For the other islands or for the rest of the state, the show would be rebroadcast on Friday. So it won't be live, of course. This evening, the program is about Indigenous Rights 2001, the state of indigenous rights in Hawaii, given all the various developments that occurred in recent times. And so with us, we have two professors from the Department of Ethnic Studies, Professor Marian Kelly, who's now actually recently retired from the department, but she's just as busy as before, if not more. And Professor Daviana Pomaikai McGregor, she's also teaches the Hawaiian course and other courses on political economy of Hawaii. Just a word before we go to our guests is that the Department of Ethnic Study we do a lot of research on Hawaii, and I just want to show some of the research that we do on Hawaii. And of course, Marian and Daviana are ones who are specialists in history of Hawaii and the Hawaiian anthropology. And the department also does research on political economy and so on. So a couple of the publications that we've had is one here is called Social Process in Hawaii, which is a journal from the Department of Sociology. And the first one is on the political economy of Hawaii. So we deal with a lot of issues on land and indigenous rights and politics and economics in Hawaii. Another one, in fact, we did it in 1999. It's called The Ethnic Studies Story, Politics and Social Movements in Hawaii. And in fact, this volume was dedicated to Marian Kelly in honor of her great service to the state and to Hawaii's people, 50 years plus of research on these issues, especially land tenure and use change in Hawaii. So these are some of the things that we do at the Department of Ethnic Studies. Before we go into the question of indigenous rights and have discussion among the three of us, and we also again welcome your calls and comments on the air since we are live. I want to put some overheads showing things relating to the groups that are in the sovereignty movement. And this is basically a partial list of the groups. I try to enlarge it as much as I can so you folks at home can see it. So I think I can do it a little bit more. And I will ask our guests, perhaps Daviana first, to comment on those groups and what is the difference between the groups that are for independence and the ones that are for nation within a nation, just to familiarize our audience or our viewers with this. Daviana.
Well, the groups which are seeking what is called nation within a nation status are looking toward getting recognition and standing for Native Hawaiians as Hawaii continues to be a state within the framework of the larger United States of America. So they're looking at what is this possible for the status of Native people, Hawaiians as Native people, to attain, given the framework of the U.S. Constitution and U.S. law. The groups who are seeking independence are of the viewpoint that the United States has no jurisdiction over Hawaii, that in the case of some of the organizations, they believe that annexation was never a legal action because it never followed the very laws the United States had itself to accomplish that, and that the United States does not therefore have legal control over Hawaii, and that Hawaii is still a kingdom and should reassert its status as an independent state, perhaps as a monarchy, perhaps as a republic, but definitely as an independent state with its own sovereignty separate from the United States.
But that list also shows that there's a lot of activity within the Native Hawaiians community regarding sovereignty, and the number, although it's a partial list, still a lot of people are involved, actively involved in the sovereignty movement. So that is something, good to know. The other thing, just to say that we have this other one, shows key players in the independence or the nation within a nation movement, and that is the sovereignty movement here. These would be groups that are more popular, or how would you characterize them? Like Marion, you might want to take that.
Yes, you have the lawful kingdom of Hawaii, a nation of Hawaii. Actually, we made a list of, well, not all for independence, though. Surely these are for independence and nation within a nation. We made a list the other night of what we knew to be kingdoms, present, representing some kind of element of a kingdom. And whether they wanted to be independent or whether they wanted to be nation within a nation, I'm not too sure. But we had 9 separate kingdoms with claims to reinstate the kingdom.
So these are organizations that would like to reinstate the kingdom, yeah. Okay, so I want to put another one, just like to give a little bit more detail about the independent groups, and then we put for the other groups as well, just to familiarize the viewers with what we're talking about when we deal with the sovereignty issue here. Okay, so let me try and make it. I hope, can we see that?
Yeah, get over to the
read along.
left side.
Yeah, okay.
Never mind the other side.
Yeah, nation of Hawaii.
No, the other way.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
okay,
that.
right. Okay, so what can
This
we...
is key independence.
Yeah. Okay, right here. All right, so this is high technology for you folks, all right?
The perfect title, or nation within a nation, perfect title is, what did they call themselves? They have just gone to The Hague and presented a case which involves a citizen of the Kingdom of Hawaii and the kingdom itself. But it also moves on toward the reason why the kingdom couldn't protect the citizen was because they said Hawaii was being occupied by another power. So this moves into the law of occupation. And in my understanding, the law of occupation says that you can occupy another country, but you have to let the rules, the laws of that country continue, not impose your own rules laws on that country.
Yeah.
So the lawyers at The Hague are taking these things into consideration. I mean, the judges are taking these things into consideration now, and we hope to have some kind of a reply by next month, March.
Very good. But we can talk about this towards the end of the show as to the status of the Native Hawaiian movement at this point. We can do that detail. The other thing I would like to look at is the other groups, which are the nation within a nation group, to give a little bit more detail about. And We'll show it in a few seconds. I think they're coming. Okay. All right. Kalahui. So we have Kalahui, we have OHA, and we have the Congressional Task Force. Why do you think we have these three as regards nation within a nation? Daviana, would you?
Well, Kalahui is probably the largest of the organizations seeking to have the status, Hawaiians to gain recognition from the U.S. Congress as a tribal nation within the United States. Office of Hawaiian Affairs actually is there, but it's not really clear that they have taken that position. It's just that after the Supreme Court ruling in the Rice versus Cayetano decision, which said that to have special entitlements offered by the state for Native Hawaiians was discrimination, I think OHA then came out more clearly to say, well, in order to protect the lands and the entitlements that flow to the Hawaiian community through the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, that we need to secure and protect the status of Hawaiians within the framework of the U.S. law. So they have now come around to support the recognition of Native Hawaiians as a nation within the nation also. And the Congressional Task Force was set up by Senator Akaka and our congressional delegation to advise him on how to draft the legislation through which Congress would actually recognize a Native Hawaiian nation and the steps that would be taken to accomplish that.
I see. Okay. Marian, do you have any further comments on this one?
No. Later on, we can talk a little bit more about how Senator Akaka went ahead with this.
Oh, yeah. When we get to the Akaka bill discussion, I think it's very important. You mentioned the Rice versus Cayetano, and this is one topic that we're going to be talking about shortly, very shortly. But, the majority of the people in Hawaii are for sovereignty without really knowing how to define sovereignty, but at least they are with the people, the Native Hawaiians, the Kanaka Maoli, in terms of support for sovereignty. But here I have this overhead that talks about arguments against sovereignty and special rights for Hawaiians. And this is part of, in fact, what I call the attack on Native Hawaiian rights by some people who live in the state but are supported by other entities from our state. So we might want to perhaps comment on these arguments and whether they are frivolous or whether they have some merit, or, I'd like to know your opinion about that. So, for instance, this isn't about righting some wrong, it's about getting power and money. This famous guy, Ken Conklin, mentioned. So what would you say to somebody like that person?
I would like to say you have to read that history, because as Daviana said, something happened, and it was even not according to their own constitution that annexation was accomplished. So go back and read your history.
Yeah, not only U.S. law, which actually the Supreme Court even disagreed on the U.S. law regarding Native Hawaiian rights, yeah? So this is left much for interpretation and so on. And in fact, it seems to me it's a political position that one takes but hides behind certain constitutionalities and so forth. So basically and essentially, it is a political matter, in fact. And people, Native Hawaiians, need to fight for their own rights in terms of sovereignty and self-determination, and people who are not Native Hawaiian, like I chose to make Hawaii my home, to fully support the self-determination right for Native Hawaiians, the Kanaka Maoli. Okay, so we can go through the rest of it, but I just no need to do that because we want to go to bigger and better things, because since you mentioned the Rice versus Cayetano, and this also deals with the arguments that regarding Native Hawaiians, especially with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. So Marian, if you would like to perhaps begin talking about the Rice versus Caetano in terms of background, because we want to go later on to the Akaka bill, which is rather crucial at this point. Yeah.
Well, my understanding of Rice versus Cayetano is that Rice insisted that everybody in the state should be able to vote for OHA, for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And not only should be able to vote for, but should be able to hold an office in the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. This is based on the United States Constitution, that if you have some kind of a government election, that everybody has a right to vote, unless, of course, you're not a certain age or something like that, or not a citizen. And so what they're doing is they're using the United States law to run the business of the Hawaiians, whose country this was. And this is, I think, I'd like to interpret this as the law of the occupation of the occupant being forced onto the people who are the indigenous people of these islands. It's not, it makes me ask the question, you know, if you're calling the Office of Hawaiian Affairs racist, then my question is, who are really the racists? Yeah. By singling out Hawaiians, the indigenous people of this country, which was taken over by the United States illegally.
Yeah, disregarding the entire history that we,
right.
You know, any honest person who reads it would come to a particular conclusion, which is like Hawaiians have been wronged, and therefore they still have their inherent right to self-determination, and at least the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, regardless of what one might think of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs since its inception, at least it is you know, an office that deals with issues relating to Hawaiians. So Native Hawaiians are the ones to vote for this office to see who they might want to represent them, you see. So any other question, you know, discussion on that, Daviana?
Well, actually, I think in the Rice case, they wanted the Supreme Court to rule on two issues. The 15th Amendment, which is what Marian talked about, that the voting process was unconstitutional, and that was ruled that it was, in fact, unconstitutional. And so the last election, everyone voted and everyone could run. But the case originally also wanted the Supreme Court to say that under the 14th Amendment, this was unconstitutional. It was discriminatory, that to even have an Office of Hawaiian Affairs was discriminatory, not just that the voting process was discriminatory. But the Supreme Court, fortunately, did not rule on that. They said, oh, we could go there, and they cited something that a law professor he had written and something that a student had written in the Yale Law Review, and they said, well, we could go there, but we're not going to go down that path at this time. But it left the question open: has the United States treated Native Hawaiians as a Native American tribe, and do the Native Hawaiians qualify as a Native Hawaiian tribe, and thus can the state also recognize Native Hawaiians as a tribe? So now, subsequently, of course, by raising that, we all anticipated there would be a subsequent challenge lawsuit to go after the 14th Amendment issues and say, yeah, Native Hawaiians are not Native Americans. They don't have a tribal status like Native Americans. Therefore, any kind of rights, special privileges for Native Hawaiians is unconstitutional. And of course, that has been filed in two cases, one by Mr. Barrett and one by Mr. Carroll, which is going to be heard in at least their attempt to put a restraining order on the state carrying out special programs for Hawaiians will be heard in March.
Yeah. That's good, because we're going to also be talking about the Barrett case, in fact, towards the end, as one of the things that would, determine Hawaii's future in terms of Native Hawaiian rights and so on. But you also mentioned, the Rice versus Cayetano. I'd like to say that when the decision, and it was like 7-2, basically, the U.S. Supreme Court deciding in terms of the 15th Amendment issue on that, that a lot of people in the community, whether they are Native Hawaiians or not, commented is that the Rice versus Cayetano is a narrow decision. And technically speaking, it was narrow. It just ruled on the 15th Amendment issue. However, what was lost, I think, for many in this kind of interpretation that it is a narrow decision, the political implications and the political impact of this, the impacts that we are seeing now, Barrett and all that kind of stuff, they really want to destroy anything that is Native Hawaiian. And this is something would be very bad for the Native Hawaiian movement as a whole. So, the thing is that this gives us shows us a lesson. In fact, teaches us a lesson, which is don't look only at the technical aspects of things, but look at the political impact, the political aspects of things, and try to defend yourselves from that onslaught that is really beginning to happen at this point. So I just want to mention this. I'd like to take this opportunity again for viewers who may have just joined the program, that this is a program live on the air for Oahu and the Big Island. And in fact, you can call in your questions or comments on Oahu 956-5670, on the Big Island 1-800-342-7949. Also, I'd like to say that we're going to have another program second Tuesday of March, which is March 13th, which will be dealing with housing issues, which is another timely topic for Hawaii's people. So we would like you to join us also for that particular show. So anyway, please, if you feel that you would like to call us on Oahu 956-5670, on the Big Island 1-800-342-7949. Okay, so actually this is a very important background, the Rice versus Cayetano, etc., because one of the things that it gave impetus to was the question of the congressional delegation here to try and protect as much as possible of Native Hawaiian rights as the congressional delegation understood those rights, and as some people in the community, Native Hawaiians, have advised the congressional delegation. So it might be interesting now to go and look at the have discussion about the Recognition Act, which is also called the Akaka Bill. And I know that both Marian and Daviana have testified. You folks testified on that, 1 for, 1 against. But that is very nice that there is like this kind of lively discussion in the community about those things. So I would like to show a segment from Daviana's testimony on the Akaka Bill, and it's a 3-minute segment, but I think it's really very important to show, and then we'll ask you to comment on it, and then we go to Marian's segment and so forth. So let's roll the tape, that segment.
Part of my contribution, also in support of the findings of the bill, those which refer to the historical trust relationship of the United States government to the Native Hawaiian people. I am incorporating as part of my testimony attachment 3. This attachment cites key public laws and congressional committee reports which document that a trust relationship between Native Hawaiians and the U.S. government, similar to that of Native Americans and the U.S. government, has evolved as the operational or de facto policy of the U.S. Congress toward Native Hawaiians. What I'm saying is this trust relationship is not something that is going to be new, but something which does exist. but that this trust relationship, because it's not formalized, requires this legislation as introduced by Senator Akaka to officially recognize a government-to-government relationship between Native Hawaiians and the U.S. government. Without this kind of formal recognition, we would lose the rights which our ancestors struggled to establish when they established the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, for example. That was really the first real time in law, through the work of the Pu'uhonua na Hawaii, that Congress acknowledged this trust relationship. And without this legislation by Senator Akaka, that trust relationship can get lost to our future generations. One important additional point to draw out, and this is more to address some of the concerns that have been raised by the participants, is that after annexation, we must realize there's a distinction in U.S. policy toward Hawaii and the multi-ethnic people of Hawaii, and the U.S. policy toward Native Hawaiians. The policy toward Native Hawaiians is looking at a policy toward Native Hawaiians as the indigenous people. The policy toward Hawaii and the multi-ethnic people of Hawaii is looking at a territory which has been incorporated, and ultimately that relationship evolved into statehood. But the issue of the policy toward Native Hawaiians, while it evolved into a trust relationship, has not reached the point of formalization. This bill being heard today addresses U.S. policy toward Native Hawaiians. It does not address U.S. policy toward Hawaii and its multi-ethnic citizens. The United Nations is the appropriate arena to take up and resolve the status of the multi-ethnic nation of Hawaii. The U.S. Congress is the appropriate arena to resolve issues relating to the entitlements and claims of us as Native people of Hawaii. As a Native Hawaiian, I believe that we need to protect the entitlements which we have as Native Hawaiians for our living Hawaiians and our descendants. As a Native Hawaiian scholar, it is my expert opinion that Native Hawaiians have a...
All right. So, Daviana, this is part of your testimony. So if you'd like to comment on that and maybe expand on the other parts of your testimony that we haven't seen here, and then we can have that kind of discussion.
Right. Well, I support the Akaka legislation. I hope it would pass this coming session, because it's important to formalize the recognition that Hawaiians have already achieved. I think the main thrust of my testimony was to say there is adequate evidence of the recognition of Native Hawaiians as Native Americans, and that the U.S. Congress had established a trust relationship with Native Hawaiians. That there's over 183 public laws the U.S. Congress passed recognizing Native Hawaiians as Native Americans and offering either funds or programs, services, or protection of Native Hawaiian rights and entitlements. There is the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, which is explicitly a trust relationship that was established between the U.S. Congress and the Native Hawaiians. But because it hasn't been formalized to say that we are a tribe, we have a tribal government, and that kind of formal recognition hasn't been given, that the Akaka legislation is an important step to accomplish that and protect us as long as we are still a part of the United States.
Yeah. So you do not preclude the question of independence at some future point.
No, no,
okay,
I do
but
not.
yeah, but the thing, it's actually the question of trust. It's already existing. This trust relationship, it's already existing. Yeah. So we'll have more discussion of this, but first,
But
yeah.
see, the problem is that
Yeah.
the Supreme Court, if it was really, if that was truly the case, I mean, if legally that's what the Supreme Court is going to do, they would have ruled that in the Rice case, but they left it open, which means that the Supreme Court has questions as to whether those 183 public laws and the Hawaiian Homes Commission add up to the same thing that they would consider tribal government status. So that's why it is necessary to have explicit legislation at this point to say that we do have this recognition.
Yeah. That's an important point in terms of at least of the legal aspects of
Yeah.
the thing, yes. So let's go now to Marian Kelly's testimony, or part of the testimony, and we run about 2.5 minutes of that. and we'll then ask Marian to comment on it, and then we'll take it from there. Then we'll have a lively discussion, and then I already have a comment from a viewer, and we'll get to that one after Marian's comments and after we see that. So we're ready. Let's go.
We all know that the annexation of Hawaii by a congressional resolution in 1898 was made against the wishes of the Hawaiian people, and it was an unconstitutional farce motivated only by military power and colonial control over the people of these islands and their independent nations. Again, we go through another U.S. process to confirm all that history all that history as being legal when it was illegal. We have gone through this so-called recognition process before. Do you remember the Native Hawaiian Study Commission going almost 20 years ago? The Native Hawaiian Study Commission, Volume 1. Volume 1 of the 2 reports cleared the United States of any responsibility for the takeover. Look to the source, Nana Ikikumu. Volume 1 was written by the commissioners representing the U.S. government position. Not surprising at all. When it comes, oh boy, the next page doesn't want to come. When you come to Volume 2, expressing the opposite conclusion, Nana Ikikumu, it was written by the Hawaiians on the commission. That was going on 20 years ago. Yes, we have gone through this before. The so-called apology resolution just 10 years ago actually reversed Volume 1 by admitting that the many acts of colonialism and cultural genocide against the Hawaiian people. So what? Nothing. 7 years later, we are still living in a colony. Now they tell us to jump through another hoop in order to get money from Congress. Do you believe this? This Akaka, so-called recognition bill, is being claimed to save the Hawaiian people.
All right, so that's part of your testimony, Marian.
Yes.
If you care to comment on it, and then we'll have discussion and.
Well, I thought it was pretty clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
That the Akaka bill, also if you read it, it puts you underneath the Department of Interior, and that's where the Native Americans are, and they haven't been extremely happy under the Department of Interior. This is not a step to more, shall we say, more independence or more what you can do to control your own lives. This is just the opposite, as I see it. I understand the other point of view, but I don't think we're going there. I think we're going to pay with our independence for money. That's really what the deal is. The deal is we need to be recognized so we can get money. Now, if the Hawaiians had their independence and had all their land back, all their ceded land, land that was given to, illegally taken by the Republic and given to the United States in exchange for annexation, if we had all that land back, the Hawaiians would have no problem with getting money, funds for the things that they need. And not only that, but they would have housing, they would have their land. We wouldn't have this big struggle that we have now with Makua Valley. We'd have the military out of there, and they'd go back home, and we'd be a lot happier. You know, this is leading us down the opposite trail.
Reminds me of that song, Get Back From Where You Belong. But anyway, before we go into the discussion, I'd like to read this comment from one of our viewers, Butch Helemano. says it's interesting how other nationalities find right in their wrong style of living. They expect people to be submissive because they're outnumbered. They can never take our language away, even if they steal the land right out from under our feet. They'll never bury us. Two wrongs don't make a right. So that's a pretty nice comment. Any ideas or any thoughts on that comment? Mary?
Well, I would only say that with independence comes a lot more assurance that you can have your own language, that you can have your own way of life, that you can have your own religious sites, that you can take care of your own land. This way, we have no control over what happens to the land that the military occupies. I'll talk about that later, too.
Yeah. Here's a question from another viewer, Greg. How would this issue affect non-Hawaiians? And I suppose we're talking about, the sovereignty issue. I was going to say first Rice versus Caetano, but the sovereignty issue as a whole, because that's actually what we're talking about. So how would this issue affect non-Hawaiians?
Well, I think if we're looking at the independence model, it needs to include all of the people who consider Hawaii their homeland. It's not just Native Hawaiians who would establish an independent government. And so that is an issue that everyone should participate in a process of nation building that everyone would have to rally around and support. And I guess why I favor is recognition of Native Hawaiians at this point, while we are still under the United States government, is that it is important for us as Native Hawaiians to stake out what do we believe are our national and ancestral lands. That is, our right is based on the fact that our people had established a nation before any of the settlers began to come to Hawaii. That is a vested right, a political right that was established and is recognized in international law, the rights of indigenous peoples to their pre-existing sovereignty and the national lands that are their ancestral lands at the time before contact. And for us as Native Hawaiians to secure those claims and those rights, we need to get it established under U.S. law right now, or we will, and if we don't get it established under U.S. law right now with all of the challenges, then that will be less recognition. Our rights and our claims will begin to diminish over the years that we don't have this kind of recognition. If we do have this recognition, we can already have it recognized that these are the ancestral lands that the Native Hawaiian people have a vested right to as descendants of these ancestors, that our right comes as a matter of inheritance. It's a matter of vested property rights and inheritance, not a matter of race, as the opponents of this would have us believe, but it's a matter of inheritance and property rights, that it is our inheritance from our ancestors to the claims we are making on these ancestral lands. And they need to be established under right as soon as possible, because the longer we wait, the more these lands are used for other purposes, the more they are misused and abused, as Marion points out, by the military as well. But if we can reclaim these lands and get it established as part of our rights as the Native Americans and Native Hawaiians under U.S. law, that would be a precedent. There's no guarantee that when there is an independent government, which will still have the same demographics, Hawaiians will probably still be 20% of the population. There's no guarantee that we're going to have any more rights under an independent government than we do under a United States government. There's the assumption that somehow Hawaiians will be in control of an independent government, but the demographics doesn't play that out, that Hawaiians would be the majority and therefore have the majority of political power and influence or control over land. Yeah. But if we had that recognition going into an independence mode, then that would be a precedent that the independent government would have to recognize.
Yeah. So you're looking at it from a practical point of view. Well, another practical issue here, the Akaka bill, or the recognition bill, didn't pass last year. didn't pass Congress. And under Bush, I'm not sure whether it's going to pass or not. So what if it didn't pass under Bush and under this Congress? What is the fallback position to protect people from people like Barrett and the people he represents, really, because it's not him doing this, but it's the whole conglomeration of people trying to destroy Native Hawaiian rights. So any fallback position, Marion, would there be?
I don't see, my feeling is that, my sense is that the United States cannot recognize the rights of Hawaiians because this would be, this is really an international thing. It's an international affair. The United States cannot give Hawaiians their rights because what they're doing is putting it more closely under the Department of Interior and the Native Americans themselves, the Indians, the Native Americans themselves don't have very many rights. Many of them are ignored. The tribes are simply ignored, and they get nothing. So, I really don't feel that this is the way to go. I think that we have to go the international way. The United Nations has Resolution 1514 says that people who are non-self-governing, and certainly the Hawaiians are non-self-governing, people who are non-self-governing can have the right to make their own determination, self-determination. And so that we do have rights internationally, but I don't think that under the United States law, under the United States Constitution, that we will get any more than we've already gotten from them, which is nothing.
Actually, talking about the international rights and stuff, this one viewer has this comment and question. President Cleveland gave a formal letter authorizing restoration of the kingdom if the Queen would grant amnesty. This is a question of international rights. Please comment on the importance of the international aspect. This is Kaleo Ka'ai from the Big Island. So is there other things to say? Because I think Marion commented on some of that, but do you have other things or comments on Marion's?
Well, I think we have to look that once the United States took over Hawaii, that they made a distinction in the policy toward Hawaii and the multi-ethnic people that make up Hawaii, and then toward Native Hawaiians. So that Native Hawaiians begin to be treated as indigenous people similarly to other Native American peoples. But the policy toward Hawaii and all the multi-ethnic people in Hawaii is to treat it as a territory. And that territory was in fact listed with the UN Committee on Decolonization when it was established, right after 1946. Yeah. So that the territory of Hawaii, multi-ethnic population and people of Hawaii, were considered a non-self-governing territory to be overseen by the United Nations toward a process of self-determination. And I think a lot of groups have made the case, I think it's convincing that we as a people, in Hawaii as a whole hasn't had the opportunity to exercise our right of self-determination. And we have that right to go back and seek again to have that right to vote. But that will not decide the issue of the indigenous people. Within that multi-ethnic Hawaii, we are indigenous people, and we have special rights. And that has to be recognized by the people who are advocating for independence and by the U.S. government. Otherwise, even if we go and get independence without our rights, our special standing and recognition being given, we will not have special rights even under an independent government. We'll just be blended in a multi-ethnic nation, and some people think that's good, and the Conklins say that that has already happened, that Hawaiians are no longer distinct that we no longer are a distinct people, and we are. We have our own language, we have our own culture, our own religion, our own spiritual practices, our own subsistence customs, and we are distinct, and we need that recognition.
And he doesn't want it in terms of an independent state. He just wants it as part of the United States, right?
No, he doesn't even want it as part of the United States.
No.
He doesn't think we deserve it at all.
Oh, well,
No.
very good then.
Not very good, very bad, as a matter of fact.
Just
But, I mean, in terms of a fallback position, I believe we have legal rights. I believe these are
Yes.
vested rights. And we as indigenous people can also go to the United Nations and file against the
Yes.
United States.
Yes.
So, I mean, there are other avenues with, try to work around the Bush administration, but it's probably true the State Department will oppose those efforts.
That's true, because this is one of the, if I may, one of the weaknesses in that position is that if you do the recognition, therefore the avenue towards independence is still open, and that is quite kind of debatable, it seems to me. Just as you said, maybe the State Department would oppose it and all that kind of stuff. So it's a larger issue that I think Native Hawaiians have to really seriously think about, ways, strategies of doing this if people, believe in independence and so on. Okay, so the next question I'd like to ask, for instance, how would this recognition bill, and perhaps we answered it indirectly, but how would it affect issues of cultural practices and so forth, like the Kohana Iki, situation on the Big Island, northwestern part of the Big Island, I suppose. And for this, I want to show a segment of video of Kohana Iki, although it is kind of settled in a sense, or unsettled, yeah. The fact of the matter, a lot of cultural communities, Native Hawaiian cultural communities, are practicing their culture. So how would that affect, the recognition bill affect those kinds of issues? So if we're ready with this segment, we'll show about 2 minutes, 45 seconds of that, All right.
We're right alongside one of the most important ancholine complexes in West Hawaii. There are 80 ponds in this area. And because of the diversity, the nutrient levels here, we have some 6 species of opai here. There are other invertebrates. There's some snails that's on a unique and rare list. What's also here is our last breeding pair of the Aio, the endangered Hawaiian stilt.
There's danger from predators, mainly mongoose and wildcats, but the biggest danger is development. And if the ancholine ponds are disturbed in any way by development and silt runoff from golf courses or any disturbances, it will harm the ecosystem here. And in time, the birds will perish. This is a central site of the ancholine complex. We are surrounded by 6 ponds that are all connected. And this is the Ku'ula stone, the guardian stone of the pond. This is where our people did their rituals to ensure good harvest and good fishing.
We're at the farthest southern pond of this ancholine complex. The wall dividing the middle of this pond and the makaha, the gateway, on the other end was used to channel water and to control the flow of water. This wall was also used to divide the different age groups for the types of fishes that we raised here, which were ava and mullet, and of course the opai ula, which was our main bait for opelo.
This one's, you look how rich the color, all the ula ula, that fire, that redness is so vivid, bright. For many generations, our family have been utilizing this opai ula for opelo fishing. And this kind of stuff is handed down from the kupunas. When I was a small kid, my tutu told me that wherever you find the opai ula coming outside in the deep ocean water, malama that place, take care. Because if you take care of that core, Innova stuff. Every time we go fishing for Othello.
Okay, so that's gives us an idea about what's going on. And so, any comments on?
Oh yes, this was a big struggle against Japanese capital coming in to build another hotel right on this land, and this has since been put into national park, and so it's preserved for the time being. But you know, we see those elements of that open land that used to be used by Hawaiians. It was privatized and Hawaiians were kept out of it. Down the road there's a large fish pond that was supposed to have a cut in half and a beach and a hotel behind it. And you know, it was a long struggle since the 1980s. We struggled against developing this area. This is practically the last part of North Kona that isn't developed. And so we finally got it put in a national park for preservation. What he's talking about in that video is, you know, their lifestyle there. They don't have this lifestyle that we have here in Honolulu, where you have to drive your car and on the freeway to get to work and back and forth, and then you're stuck in the middle of everything. You know, their lifestyle is different.
Yeah. So we're kind of running out of time, but
Okay.
I have a couple of questions here. One from Spencer Camuela, Big Island. The question is, considering OHA's dysfunctional history, in the event that we would become recognized, what would be the mechanism to create a functional body? Which I think is a legitimate question. Yeah. So any comments on that?
Well, the recognition bill would be the process, and it outlines a step-by-step for those who want to participate in the process and be part of this entity to register, enroll on a list, and then from there, people who are on the roll would elect representatives who would draft a constitution, and then from there, once the constitution would be approved, then there would be an election for representatives. But the form of government, like, you know, representation, how would all the islands and the districts be represented, that would all be part of the process of developing the government, and it's not specified in the law because that would be that would be taking away our right of self-determination. Yeah. So it's up to Hawaiians. We all have to participate and engage and make the right decisions.
And here's a legitimate question, another one from Greg, I believe on Oahu. Why is this process taking so long? Why is it so complicated? And I think, you know, people ask, you know, we've been going through this road for so long and not much happened, really. So any thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot of opposition to it in the U.S. Congress. I mean, because you have the people who are filing these suits are representative of a lot of the same kind of people who are in the U.S. Congress. They're allied with a group called the Alliance for a Colorblind America, and so there are a lot of groups who there's a backlash against civil rights legislation and against Native Americans. So it's not like you know, the United States wants to do this. It's still a struggle to get that kind of recognition.
Yeah. So that's good. Now the question. Related to this and other things that we've been talking about is, where is the Native Hawaiian movement going at this point, giving all this onslaught on it, from the versus, you know, Caetano, Rice versus Caetano to Barrett and so on. So some of the things that might determine where the Native Hawaiian movement is going at this point is maybe the Barrett case. So any thoughts on that, Marian? Regarding Barrett, for instance, or Carroll,
Barrett,
for that matter?
As I understand it, the Barrett case attacks three things. One is the existence of OHA, not just who's going to vote for it and who's going to be on. Wipe OHA out, that it's racist. Another thing is that they propose to wipe out the Hawaiian homelands. No Hawaiian homes. It's racist, according to the Constitution, according to them. Of course, you have to remember this is Alliance for a Colorblind America, and this, of course, puts people with big money into and the poor people, which are us, we don't have this, so we don't have any power. The third thing that they want to wipe out is any access rights to Mauka Makai for cultural purposes or for whatever. And that's just the beginning. Essentially, as Davey said, this alliance is well organized. It's moving to end the rights of all indigenous people. They don't particularly care just about the Hawaiians. They're going to wipe out any rights for Native Americans too. So, you know, this is a big movement, and until people understand this, they better learn about what's really happening in America. And this so-called color blindness merely means that if you have the power, you can take over anybody's lives, and they don't care.
Yeah. We're also running out of time. We have still a few more things to cover. I want to show photos and then a video from Makua, because this is one of the other things that the native, the native Hawaiian people are involved in.
Yes,
right?
very much so.
So. Yeah, and it's still going on, and one of the struggles that would very much determine where the Native Hawaiian movement is going. So if we can show part of the video at least, and then we go to the photos. Yeah, so that would be fine.
You have a video on Makua?
Yeah, just like we can show.
Don't have time
a minute of that and stuff like that. Let's show a minute of that, just to. Yeah. Is it ready?
Also for trees, they're trying to get indigenous trees back in here. They put fence up there in certain areas around the plant so the goats don't get into the endangered plants. The Army lawyers are looking it over. They'd like to move cattle in here. When it all comes down to it, it might say the Army is caretakers for this land. And if the Army, a lot of people say, well, get the military out of here, but you got to think too, if the Army is not in here, then who would be in here? And if you check those leases out and the people...
You looking at them?
Yeah. No, I think McCandless would have had.
You see the target?
Those black giant squares up on the mountain.
It's down though.
Yeah, that's the targets.
And the helicopters fly low and the machine gun.
Coming in. Sound like, it really sound like TV. Like you're watching a war movie on TV, only in real life.
In full blast, the volume.
Full blast volume.
They wake up from their sleep, because at night, they even practice.
For the rest of the night, I got a little OP stuck to me all night long.
His daughter.
When I lay on the ground and the bombs are dropped at night.
Okay, so here is Makua, and Marian, as you can talk as I am showing photos, because these are your photos about Makua and some of the things that happened.
Okay, well, we were down at the legislature today because there's a bill in setting up a commission for Makua, and you know, this is state land. This is part of the ceded land. This was Hawaiian land, and we are very small islands. We have very small amounts of land, and here they're taking one of the most beautiful valleys that we have on the leeward side of the island of Oahu, and they're taking it over and they're trashing it. These bombs have vicious things in them, and they're not cleaning up. They're not taking responsibility. And so this big demonstration that we had here, it went for 10 hours giving testimony, and the majority of the people said, you know, we need to do a scientific EIS, not just an apology for what we're doing there.
Thank you. We have to wrap it up now because we ran out of time, but we'll get back to issues like this later on. Thanks for our guests, and thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time, March 13th at 7:30 p.m., where we will be discussing the housing issues. Thank you very much.